The FIA is planning to have a new fully independent engine builder for when V8s return to Formula One in the 2030s to stop what Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, says is the manufacturer teams exerting too much control over the independents. John, you were in the room as part of a select conversation with Mohammed Ben Sulayem at the British Grand Prix. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, this is an interesting development. We know that Mohammed Ben Sulayem's looking at V8s from 2031. We're finding a few more details here and there, rules implications. But he just mentioned that this new plan, the plan for an independent FIA-appointed supplier, which likely means you put it out for tender, you find a supplier, and the aim is quite simple, that if you're a customer team like a McLaren, like a Williams, like an Alpine even at the moment, and you need a power unit for the new V8 regulations, you now don't need to go cap in hand to a manufacturer and try and sort a deal out. You can go to the FIA's independent supplier. You can get the engine at a fixed cost, whatever the FIA says the cost is there, and you're free to do what you want to do. It's as simple as that.
It sounds amazing and fully utopian. Did he put any flesh on the bones of this in terms of how it might work? Because the idea of an FIA-appointed independent supplier sounds great, but who is that supplier going to be and who's going to pay for it?
Yeah, there's no details yet in terms of who the supplier is, how the tender's going to work, what the cost is going to be, but it's very much aimed at companies like Cosworth, for example, that have successfully produced V8 engines in the past. And the door for this has opened up primarily because one of the key drivers for this push for V8s is to make engines less complex and, more importantly, cheaper. That the R&D costs come down by 50%. You get rid of super expensive technology like the MGUH. You simplify the MGUH using materials that are much cheaper, and the cost becomes so cheap. So not only can teams go to an independent supplier, in theory, and this is what Mohammed Ben Sulayem also suggested, the engines will be cheap enough for squads like Alpine and McLaren to go and build their own engines themselves.
Wow. So do you think that's more likely to happen then? Because we have kind of been here before. Obviously, V8s are not a new thing. And when the engines back in the distant past were cheaper and didn't have so much electrification, obviously it wouldn't cost you so much as an independent team to buy an engine from an established manufacturer. So what would be the incentive for a team like McLaren or Alpine, which already had an engine program which it shut down, to kind of build up that infrastructure and build their own, when it surely is more efficient to just buy the new cheaper engines from Mercedes or Ferrari or whoever?
Yeah, the devil's in the detail with this, I think. A lot depends on what the cost is and what you get. If the cost is super cheap for the independent supplier, then it doesn't make sense to invest tens or hundreds even of millions of dollars in building up an engine facility. But Red Bull, for example, with its current rule set, has made a success of its powertrains division. It, although it maybe doesn't like it itself, has produced, according to the FIA, the most powerful ICE on the grid. And it makes you master of your own destiny. You get manufacturer advantages. We know the 26 regs, for example, that being a manufacturer does offer an implicit edge in terms of your development, your packaging, your installation, your optimization. So there are gains to be had. But again, it comes down to money. It comes down to philosophy and strategy. I spoke to Francois Provost, the CEO of Renault at Silverstone, shortly after I spoke to Mohammed Ben Sulayem and said, "Are you interested in creating your own V8 for the future?" He said, "Well, while I agree with the V8 philosophy, in terms of our strategy, we don't want to do an engine ourselves. We prefer to remain as a customer." So they've ruled it out. And from McLaren's perspective, it's a project to be evaluated. It could be something they look at in the future, but it's not being worked on yet. And time-wise, a source at McLaren told me that if we want to start work on this for 2031, they need to be doing it by today, basically. So I think the Monday after the British Grand Prix deadline may well soon be passing without an agreement.
Yeah, so I think we can put McLaren in the we'll buy from the independent supplier or from an established manufacturer camp. Obviously, the boss of Renault can't say, having a short time ago shut down the F1 engine program, "Oh, we're interested in doing a new one for the next rules." But obviously, like you say, a lot can change in the years ahead. Money, I think, is the key thing here. Obviously, independent engine suppliers are nothing new in F1. Cosworth used to do it, but they ended up supplying the smaller teams with less money. There wasn't so much money to develop the engines. And in the end, it becomes an untenable situation. So I'm quite interested to know how the FIA would get around this system and make sure that not only is this new independent engine viable, but also competitive.
Yeah, this is the market forces problem that we don't have an answer to yet, because one of the problems with the current power units, and this I'm sure we'll go into when this idea of an independent supplier has come up in the past, is that a manufacturer like Mercedes supplying customers actually costs it money. There is no pure profit from supplying the power unit because you're limited in the regulations in terms of how much you can charge. So all your extra elements come from gearboxes, suspension, marketing deals, and the extra spotlight you get as a manufacturer. So if you're an independent supplier, you're not going to set up an engine division, work on a power unit, supply X teams if for every single partner you have, you're losing a certain amount of money. So it very much depends on all the economics of it all matching up, that the cost of developing a power unit, supplying a power unit, how many supply deals you get, all lines up with the ability of that independent manufacturer to make a profit and make money. So if the power units become very, very cheap, it's going to make a lot of sense. If we end up with some more complex regulations, if we end up with a turbo, if the batteries start creeping up in size, we don't know yet. But this is all about the reality, the devil's in the detail. We've got the idea. There's still a lot to sort out before 2031.
Well, I think the fact that McLaren are ruling out because they needed to start building up the project today means that probably we can rule out any kind of ground up manufacturer doing this. So you're going to need to find an established company that has the technology or the infrastructure in place. And I remember, and I'm sure you do as well, probably 12 years ago, the company Pure, which I believe was set up by Craig Pollock, who was involved in BAR and Jacques Villeneuve's F1 career. They were heralded as the company that was going to become the independent supplier for the original V6 turbo hybrid formula. And of course, it never got off the ground. So does Mohammed Ben Sulayem remember that story? And if he does, who does he think is going to be this mysterious magic company that springs up of nowhere to do this job?
I'm sure he does remember that story. But I think one of the key differences between that era, when we were heading to the original turbo hybrid engines, and now, is that costs are being driven down. That one of Mohammed Ben Sulayem's key targets is very cheap, very simple engines that an independent supplier can do. These turbo hybrids have proved to be so expensive, so complex, with a MGUH technology that manufacturers struggled with, spent tens and hundreds of millions of dollars developing, which barely had any relevance to road cars, wasn't really a transition into the automotive industry. So it's never going to work for an independent. Whereas if we end up with simplified V8 engines with material restrictions, with a simple turbo or a simple battery, because Mohammed Ben Sulayem's talked about we do one or both. We're not going to have a turbo and a big battery. We choose which one it is for weight and cost reasons. If it's simple enough and the economics work, then there's no reason why an independent. And I think everyone talks about Cosworth because it's got a history of these engines. It knows what it's doing. It's got the facilities already. It knows how to build a power unit. That this is the sort of company that could go there for a tender.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess as ever, it will come down to the politics of discussing this and, as you say, fleshing out the detail and trying to bring the existing manufacturers on board as they go. What else did you learn from this conversation? Take us inside the room, because I believe former Red Bull boss Christian Horner also dropped in on your conversation.
Yeah, this was quite funny. We were talking, it was a round table with Mohammed Ben Sulayem and some Fleet Street journalists covering a lot of topics. We covered the calendar, the possibility of new races coming on board, Max Verstappen's future in Formula One, and Christian Horner's name came up. And just at that moment, literally, Christian had phoned up Mohammed to say he was at Silverstone, and Mohammed answered the phone and told him, "I'll come into my motorhome. I'm upstairs in the office." And the door knocks, and Christian opens the door, and then shock as he finds 5 journalists sat around the table. But it was all fine. He knows us all. We had a good chat afterwards. But I think it's one of those that he wasn't quite anticipating the reception he would get there. In terms of other stuff from Mohammed, I think one of the key things also that's quite interesting is refueling. That a lot of talk is about making the cars lighter for this new generation of cars. He wants to pull off 100 kilograms of mass from the car, make the racing better, make the cars safer as well, because Mohammed talks about, heavy cars are more dangerous in crashes. So you pull that 100 kilograms off. However, the reality of teams and engineers, that if you run a normally aspirated engine in a 100 kilogram lighter car than we've got right now, that's going to need 70, 80 kilos more fuel to run over race distance, and you end up with a car that weighs exactly the same. So this is why the topic of refueling has come up again, because there's little point spending money, shaving money off a car if you then just add that weight with fuel. So the way around that is refueling, which you had up until 2009. So at the moment, Mohammed Ben Sulayem says that a study is underway to evaluate it. They'll evaluate the safety implications, the implications on racing, because refueling doesn't necessarily make for a good spectacle, because you just end up with lots of flat out driving where there isn't much chance to pass and very little strategy differences.
Mini
And also
sprints,
costs.
basically.
Yeah, and also costs, because I think estimates put it $4 to $5 million extra per team per year for all the refueling equipment and the extra freight. So no decisions made. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I think a lot will also depend on, do we end up with a turbo? Because if we have a V8 with a turbo, obviously the fuel requirements can come down a little bit, especially if there's a battery there. So I think it depends what direction we're going in. I reckon we've probably got 12 months before we need to nail into some of the details.